Hello and welcome back to Dan Cave, and welcome to part 3 of the Airfix Bristol Blenheim build. So we're on to part 3. So at the end of part 2 we got, well, this far. I'll stick a snippet up in the corner, which basically got most of the airframe complete. So today it's a fairly short video. It's around about the 20-minute mark, depending on how long I ramble on for at the start and at the end. So it's going to cover getting things like the engines together, getting the landing gear off the sprue, all the kind of small aerials, bits and pieces, get all of those parts done, cleaned up, prepped, and certainly for get the engines assembled, get them together, get them onto the airframe, and get the airframe into primer. So normally these videos come out pretty much as I've done the work, but on this occasion I'm actually a little bit ahead of myself, and the kit is sat down there in a box, so it's actually painted and deckled. So that's going to be part 4, which should follow on pretty quickly from this part. So this part will get out there, get everything up to primer, and then in the next part we'll try and cover the painting, deckling, weathering, and probably the finishing phase, depending on how much I do. So sit back, put your feet up, enjoy the video, hopefully, and I'll talk to you at the end at some point. So thanks for watching. And here we go. So it's straight into the action. Action. This is modeling. It's never that much action, really. So lots of removal of parts from the sprue, getting stuff prepared. So what I like to do is I try to, I suppose, break things down into sub-assemblies. So at this stage I'm trying to get all the parts off the sprue that are going to need some interior green on them. So that's going to be things like the engine cowlings, the back of the engine, doors, etc. I'm also getting the 2 bombs off so I can get them glued together, and they'll also get prepped for painting. It's just 2 half-switch bombs. They're just quickly glued together with some Tamiya extra thin, and they'll be held together for 20 minutes, 30 minutes with some close pegs. So once they're nicely set, I can go in with the sander just to clean up that join line, using a UMP sander again. And as is the usual kind of process, you just got to let the sander do the work. And that'll get everything nicely sorted. So those parts can then get mounted to my homemade paint clips. So basically all it is, I bought a box of crocodile clips. I think I bought them off Amazon, and a pack of basically bamboo skewers. And I use them to make up little paint clips. Use either some masking tape or some electrical tape, and that secures the clip to the top of the stick. And that works absolutely perfectly. So now I'm getting some of the engine components off as well, so I can get that mounted and prepped for painting. So clean up any sprue attachment points, etc. And as you can see on the right hand side, I've basically fashioned kind of a mounting piece for any of the flat parts like the gear doors or the bomb bay doors. Then everything gets mounted to either cocktail stick or the crocodile clip as necessary. And then using some cardboard from an IKEA box works perfectly for mounting any items on sticks. So I'm using some AK cutters at the moment. They're pretty good, pretty sharp. They've got a nice kind of small blade on them, so they do get in amongst the smaller parts. And probably more importantly for some people, they're actually not that expensive. I've not tried the Tamiya ones, so I can't quite compare in terms of quality, but certainly these ones do the job. So for the guns, I'm actually keeping the guns on the sprue just by a single attachment point, because they're quite small and easy to lose. So one of the other items that needs prepping is the gun turret. That also needs masking as well. So I'm doing that in the same method that I use for the main canopy, using some masking tape and using a pencil to outline the bits I need masked, and then going in with a sharp scalpel blade to trim round the pencil marks and then remove the excess tape. And once I'm happy with that, that should leave me with all the masked areas that I need, and the turret framing clear and ready for interior green. So as you can see, these are all the parts that are going to be sprayed the interior green. So you've got the back of the engines, the engine cowling pieces, the bomb bay doors and the undercarriage doors. So it's the same extra acrylic interior green that I've used before. So I'm also painting all the canopy framing in the interior green colour. So that means if you do look inside, when you look inside the clear parts, you'll be able to see the interior colour rather than the primer colour or the camouflage colour through the inside. And that goes on the turret glazed part as well. So all of this is pushed through the UMP Apex. I think running about 20 psi. So the engine parts, looking at photos of the engines, they seem to be predominantly gloss black paint, and certainly the kind of front parts were gloss black, top of the cylinder heads etc. were all gloss black, so using Revell gloss black to paint them. The manifolds for the exhausts are painted in a burnt iron colour, although in fact they're completely invisible when you get them installed in the engine, as we'll see a little bit later. So I'm going to pick out the details on the engine using Revell Steel, I think, which is number 91. Just using a fine brush to run in around the cylinders, and they all got painted in that steel colour. So it's a little bit fiddly, a little bit time consuming, but it is, I don't know, brush painting is a little bit therapeutic for me, so I do quite like doing it. So once I'm happy with all those parts and have nicely dried, given it's acrylics, I've given it about half an hour drying time. We can start mounting those parts to the back of the engine. So the manifold goes in first, then the single row of cylinders. There is keyways on all the parts, so you can't really install them the wrong way around. And they all got nicely attached. And we'll just do a quick zoom in to see how that looks. So as you can see, it's pretty much gloss black with the cylinders then picked out in steel. So now I'm going to use some Ammo engine grime wash, I think it is. So that's going to be run in around all the recesses just to add a little bit of weathering to the front face of the engine. So the exhaust pieces, they were painted in gunmetal, and they attach to the bottom section of the cowling. So this is one area where the fit is not brilliant, and I've seen this with a number of Airfix kits with piston engines. I had this problem with the Gloucester Gladiator as well. So the cowling's made up of 3 individual parts, and they just don't meet, or at least they don't meet very well. They do slot in nicely against the kind of mounting edge at the back of the engine cowling, but around the circumference, those parts just do not meet. So it's kind of really 2 choices. You can either accept it and live with it, try and manipulate it to minimize the amount of gap, which is exactly what I'm doing at the moment. Just using the extra thin as well to make sure there's enough grab around the base of those parts. Keep working around, manipulating them, trying to get that gap down to a minimum. Yeah, not really to much avail. So then that leaves you with well, pretty much option 2. So option 2 is break out the filler. And that's the next step that we're going to go to. So once both cowlings are complete, and it's the same problem on both, the fit just isn't there. So also on these parts, there's the mounting for the props. So this means you can leave the props until the last assembly stage, which is always a good way of mounting. So they're not in the way and likely to get knocked off or damaged during the process. So now the front face, which is a single piece on both engines, gets fitted. I suppose that's the kind of one plus point of the way that the assembly stages are broken down. At least that front piece is just one piece. But however, there is a little bit of filling to do. So those kind of cowl pieces just don't line up properly. So we've got no choice but to break out the filler. I mean, at least, you know, the filler's not visible from the inside. It's so tightly packed in there. You can't see any of it kind of squeeze through to the other side. But pretty much every kind of join around the cowling needed a little bit of filler just to help it close up those gaps. So I'm using Revell's model filler, which is a solvent-based filler, so it does grab into the plastic pretty good. I do like this. It does sand pretty smooth as well. Drying time, particularly if you put on a thick coat, can be quite a few hours. But in this case, I think I left it about an hour and a half. And I can go back in with a UMP sander just to start knocking back the excess filler. So as with all kind of filling activities, you need to let the sander do the work. Not too much pressure. Once the bulk of that kind of filler is gone, we'll go in with one of the sanding sponges, one of the thinny sponges. And then, because there is some kind of fine details around the engine, I'm also using some files just to make sure I don't completely obliterate any details. But all in all, a little bit of filler and a little bit of effort and some filing work, and that should hopefully be a much better looking engine cowling than if we went with option 1, which was do nothing and just accept it. So now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to mask off the front face of those engines. So I'm just using a little compass cutter to cut out an appropriate sized circle of masking tape. And I can use the compass hole in the front basically to mount that to the propeller attachment point, and then just use a little bit of manipulation and a cocktail stick just to bed that tape in around the engine, and that should prevent any overspray getting in amongst the engine. So we do the same for both engines, and that's them completely ready and ready to install. So once again, they are keyed. So that means at least the kind of general alignment is pretty okay. And that keyway is reasonably tight fitting, so I'm not too worried about any alignment issues with those engines. So I've used a bit of CA glue just to secure them. And now I start to add some little aerials onto the outside. So there's a couple under each wing, a couple on the nose, and then I guess a radio aerial on the top fuselage. So all of those are secured with Tamiya Extra Thin. Once that's allowed to cure for a reasonable amount of time, at least a couple of hours, those parts are very, very secure. Obviously still reasonably fragile parts themselves and easy to break off, and that's always a risk at this point, certainly with me. I know I can be notorious for knocking off pitot tubes and aerials. However, we need to mask up any of the kind of open areas. So the main landing gear bay, gun turret area. So I'm using some foam sponges, cut down a little bit, and then squeezing them into the apertures in the airframe. And that's pretty much all the masking done that I need. This kit's now basically ready for priming. And that's where we're off to now. So we're off to spray booth. So it's UMP grey primer. I'm going to shoot at about 30 psi using the UMP Apex airbrush. So it's the same process as always with the grey primer. I like to build it up from some quite light dust coats. Generally, by the time I kind of work my way around, the kind of starting point is nearly finished because they are quite light coats. And that'll give a nice basis for the kind of main base colours and camouflage scheme, which we'll get to in the next part. So overall, I'm pretty happy with that top side. So I'm going to leave that dry for about probably about 10 or 15 minutes to get it touch dry, and then carefully flip the model over. And I can basically now prime all the underside areas. As you can see, the bomb bay is masked up as well, using some Tamiya tape, and that protects anything I need kind of protected at this stage. So yeah, overall kind of happy with how the primer went down. Seeing as I have all the landing gear parts off the sprue and ready, they're going to get sprayed in gloss black. I think the oleos I'll go back later with a bit of silver paint, just to add a little bit of detail to them. So a couple of other bits and pieces in around the engine need to be painted gloss black. Wheels have been assembled as well, and they're painted in matte black. I think I'm using Vallejo Model Air black. So it is interesting to note that there's not a particularly good positive keyed location for the wheels, but they are flattened on the bottom to give that kind of weighted look for the tyres, which is a kind of reasonably nice touch. And then it's matte black on the props, and that's it, we're done. Back to me. So there we go, that's part 3 complete. So I managed to get, well, the engines painted, assembled, filled, installed, all the kind of small aerials and bits and pieces, landing gears prepped, props are prepped. I think pretty much everything is prepped and ready to go. So the airframe itself is now primed. And in the next part, I'll be able to go through the painting, decaling, weathering phase. So I hope you enjoyed this video, albeit relatively short. Of course, big thank you to everyone who's liked, subscribed so far. And if you've not done so, please give a subscribe. Please pop a like if you can, and feel free to drop a comment. It's all appreciated. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you soon for part 4. Bye bye.